Day 31 of growing our microbial sandbox by adding random stuff and observing it under the microscope every day. Thanks to the chili powder from yesterday, the sandbox is now tinted red. Let's take a look and see what's still alive in there. The jar is filled with red natural oils from the chili powder. Unfortunately, I only spotted a few protozoa and a moderate number of bacteria. Compared to previous days, the ecosystem looks clearly unhealthy. Fewer organisms and less diversity. If this decline continues, we might need to consider restarting the sandbox. What do you think? Now let's add some new ingredients. Phenol red. For those unfamiliar, it's a pH indicator. It turns yellow in acidic conditions, orange when neutral, and red in alkaline environments. I mixed it into the sandbox and it stayed red, so the pH might be on the alkaline side. Don't worry, a small amount of phenol red is safe. It's commonly used in microbiology labs. Coca-Cola, a sugary boost for our microbes. Let's see who enjoys the sugar rush. Tobacco, because maybe the microbes need to chill too. That's it for today. See you tomorrow. Day 32 of growing our microbial sandbox by adding random stuff and observing it under the microscope every day. Remember the phenol red we added yesterday? The sandbox is now orange in color. That might mean the microorganisms have produced acidic metabolites, neutralizing the previously alkaline environment. Let's take a look and see what's still alive in there. Good news. More microorganisms are back. And look who returned. This kidney-shaped microbe is called poda, a type of ciliate that thrives on bacteria. They're often found in soil and decaying matter, and they seem happy here. So it looks like our sandbox is stabilizing again. Now I've received tons of comments asking me to add blood, so let's do it. Safely. But first, let's take a look at my blood under the microscope. Don't try it at home, especially when handling microorganisms. There's always a risk of infection. You can see a large number of red blood cells floating around like tiny donuts. These biconcave discs are great at transporting oxygen. Some look a bit shriveled, that's likely due to osmotic changes. Then I mixed in a bit of sandbox fluid. Now some red blood cells appear paler. That's because they burst due to the osmotic imbalance between the fluid and their internal environment, leaving just the empty membranes behind. Take a closer look. A white blood cell is clinging to some bacteria. It looks like it's activated, trying to defend against invaders. Even the ciliates didn't last long. They burst quickly in the blood sandbox mix. Not a friendly place for them. Anyway, I added some blood into the sandbox to see what happens next. Also adding dog fur. Don't worry, my dog doesn't have any ticks or mites. Deodorant. Actually, just some perfume. Let's make the sandbox smell nicer. That's it for today. See you tomorrow. Day 33 of growing our microbial sandbox by adding random stuff and observing it under the microscope every day. Believe it or not, even though the sandbox looks totally rotten, the smell isn't nearly as bad as you'd imagine. Let's dive in and see what's still alive in there. I'm actually pretty happy with what I found today. The sandbox seems relatively balanced again. Lots of different ciliates swimming around. I spotted colpoda, a bunch of smaller ciliates, and a few that wiggle dramatically as they move. Most of them are hanging around chunks of organic matter, clearly enjoying their buffet. Now let's add some new stuff. A lot of you asked for a fish, so I got a capelin, famous for having loads of eggs hidden in its belly. Let's cut it open. You can see the entire belly is packed with eggs. I took a sample under the microscope, but honestly, it's hard to see much detail at first. So I applied a bit of pressure to flatten the eggs slightly, and it looks like they're mostly empty, probably because they're still immature. Anyway, I added a few to the sandbox. Next up, methylene blue. Since it's bactericidal, I just added a single drop. Don't want to wipe out the entire population. And a swab for my belly button. Yeah, a little embarrassing, but we're all friends here, right? That's it for today. Let's see what grows tomorrow. See you then. Day 34 of growing our microbial sandbox by adding random stuff and observing it under the microscope every day. The smell is really strong today. But that's usually a good sign. A strong odor means the microorganisms are thriving. Let's dive in and see what's still alive in there. Once again, I spotted tons of colpoda. It's kind of cute how they gather around organic matter to enjoy their meal. There are also lots of tiny ciliates tucked inside the debris, and I noticed some strange elongated single-celled microorganisms. Their movement is odd, almost like they're shivering instead of swimming. They're extremely small, nearly the size of bacteria. Overall, the sandbox has turned into a thriving little world full of microbial life. Now let's add today's new items. First up, bone and bone marrow. I got some chicken, cracked open the bones, and scooped out the marrow. Let's check it out under the microscope. The structure is hard to make out. For clearer details, I'd probably need a microtome to slice it super thin. But hey, we work with what we've got. Anyway, into the jar it goes. Next, a swab for my sink drain. It's as gross as it sounds, so let's take a closer look. I found a bunch of nematodes and rotifers. It's not too surprising. Nematodes can travel up through plumbing and end up in places like sink drains. But don't worry, they're harmless. It's actually great to add them into the sandbox. They bring more diversity. And finally, soy sauce. Just a few drops though. Too much salt could kill off the microbes. That's all for today. Let's see what grows tomorrow. See you then. Day 35 of growing our microbial sandbox by adding random stuff and observing it under the microscope every day. I don't know if it's because of the raw chicken we added, but I really have to hold my breath when opening the jar now. Let's dive in and see what's still alive. To my surprise, Colpoda has completely vanished today. Instead, there's now a huge number of those tiny, shivering, elongated ciliates. Could this shift be caused by the soy sauce we added yesterday? If so, it shows how different microorganisms respond to salt in unique ways. One interesting observation: these ciliates have a long flagellum that always points in the direction they're swimming. It swings back and forth like a curious cat's toy, likely sensing for prey ahead. Now, time to add today's items. First up is vodka. I brought them some Belvedere, which has 40% alcohol, so I'm only adding a tiny drop to avoid wiping out the entire population. Also, I want to keep some for myself. Let's observe how this affects the sandbox under the microscope. At first, there's turbulence. A strong disturbance spreads across the field of view. Once things settle, almost all the ciliates appear dead. Surprisingly, some bacteria are still moving, although after a bit more vodka, they also stop. Everything becomes still. Next item, a tear. Yes, just one drop. It took a bit of effort to collect, so let's hope it contributes something interesting. And finally, ginger. Maybe it will help reduce the smell inside the jar. That's all for today. Let's see what grows tomorrow. See you then. Day 36 of growing our microbial sandbox by adding random stuff and observing it under the microscope every day. There's a disgusting layer forming on the surface of the sandbox content. I had to take a closer look under the microscope to see what it really is. The layer is full of bacteria and some protozoa. This kind of layer is called biofilm. It is produced by microorganisms to help them stick to surfaces, and it also acts as a protective barrier, keeping harmful substances away from the microbes underneath. Aside from that, the sandbox is still dominated by those teardrop-shaped microorganisms. Today, I also noticed some round ones, which are clearly different species. I even found some amoeba. They are not commonly seen in the sandbox. Now, time to add today's items. First is burned paper. That was a strange request, but I'm curious how it will affect the sandbox ecosystem. Next, I collected a swab from the floor and toilet. Let's take a look under the microscope. As expected, there are millions of bacteria. I added that into the sandbox. Since it is raining today, I also collected some rainwater and examined it under the microscope. I found a few bacteria, but surprisingly, not as many as in the toilet swab. Let's see what grows tomorrow. See you then. Day 37 of growing our microbial sandbox by adding random stuff and observing it under the microscope every day. Now the sandbox is full of ash. Let's find out if it has any effect. It turns out that the ash didn't change much. Microorganisms are still swimming around actively. Alongside the familiar teardrop-shaped ciliates, I finally spotted some of the larger ones. There aren't many of them, and they move so fast that it's hard to capture them clearly on camera. Hopefully, they'll thrive and multiply in the coming days. I also found the shell of a testate amoeba. Unlike naked amoebas, testate amoebas build protective shells using minerals from their surroundings, much like snails. This one doesn't move, so it's likely empty. Now it's time to add today's new items. First up is gold flake ink. I thought it would be fun to decorate the sandbox a little. As soon as I added it, it spread quickly through the jar. Under the microscope, the ink is full of shimmering gold flakes in various shapes. When you look closely, the way they reflect light makes them appear almost rainbow-colored. Next is a small feather I found. Hopefully I won't get avian flu from it. Lastly, I added some water from my dog's water bowl. I'm fairly confident it's clean. That's all for today. See you tomorrow. Day 38 of growing our microbial sandbox by adding random stuff and observing it under the microscope every day. I can still see the gold flakes shimmering inside the jar. Let's take a closer look under the microscope. The gold flakes are scattered everywhere like tiny treasure pieces floating in the water. They don't seem to affect the microorganisms. Everyone is still swimming actively. Do you see this matchstick-shaped microorganism? It is a rod-shaped bacterium containing a spore inside. Spores are survival experts. They can resist heat, chemicals, and harsh conditions. When the environment becomes more favorable, the spore transforms back into a living bacterium. Besides the familiar teardrop-shaped ciliates, I also spotted some red-colored ones. These are called blepharisma. They are a type of ciliate that lives in both freshwater and saltwater. Their red color comes from a natural pigment inside their bodies. Now it is time to add today's new items. First is ice. I do not think our microbes are afraid of the cold. Let's check under the microscope. Yes, they are still swimming around just fine. Next is water collected from a dirty river. It contains a lot of algae, so it might help increase diversity in the sandbox. Finally, I'm leaving the jar outside for a full day with the cap open. Fresh air and environmental exposure may invite new microorganisms to join the party. That is all for today. Let's see what grows tomorrow. See you then. Day 39 of growing our microbial sandbox by adding random stuff and observing it under the microscope every day. Yesterday, we left the sandbox outdoors. Let's take a look and see if any new microorganisms have shown up. I spotted some algae, probably from the dirty river water we added. Some algae can reproduce rapidly, so I hope they will not take over the whole sandbox. There are also many round microorganisms floating around. However, they are not as active as the ones we usually see. Look at the ciliate. It is enjoying a meal on a piece of organic debris. It is kind of adorable. Looks like it enjoys the food we provided. I also found a mysterious large segment. It resembles part of an oligoceta, which is a type of aquatic earthworm. But I have not seen a complete worm, so I'm not totally sure. Overall, the sandbox is still full of bacteria and protozoa. It is still alive and thriving. Now it is time to add today's new items. First, let's try a fun experiment that one of you suggested. I microwaved a portion of the sandbox for 20 seconds. The bottle felt slightly warm. Surprisingly, many microorganisms still survived. Not bad for such a short heat exposure. Now for the additions. Peanut butter. I hope microbes do not have peanut allergies. And a bit of milk powder. That should add some nutrients to help them grow strong. That is all for today. Let's see what grows tomorrow. See you then. Day 40 of growing our microbial sandbox by adding random stuff and checking it under the microscope every day. Look at that foam on the surface. I think I added way too much milk powder yesterday. The bacteria are definitely fermenting it now. Pretty disgusting. Let's take a closer look. I hate to disappoint you, but most of the protozoa seem to have disappeared. Now it's mostly bacteria swimming around, along with a ton of yeast cells. Looks like milk is a perfect nutrient for yeast. I did spot a few protozoa, only 4 of them actually, and some cysts. I'll need to improve the sandbox environment to help them hatch again. To keep things interesting, let's do a gram stain today. It's a common technique used to visualize and identify bacteria. Anyway, let's check it out under the microscope. Most of the bacteria are rod-shaped. Some are purple and some are pink. The purple ones are gram-positive rods with thicker cell walls. The pink ones are gram-negative rods with thinner walls. This distinction is super important in diagnostic science. You can see they mostly gather around organic matter where nutrients are more abundant. There are also some pink S-shaped bacteria. Those are spirochetes, which are common in fresh water. And those big, oval, purple cells, they're yeast, much larger than bacteria. Let's add more stuff today. Some playground dirt, lots of people walk on it, so it's probably full of interesting microbes. And just a pinch of agar powder. Hopefully it won't turn the whole sandbox into jelly. That's all for today.